Hey, Pastor Kevin here, and welcome to Devotions for March 4th, 2022. And as I mentioned yesterday, we'll be looking at some discernment stuff with some help from Henry Nouwen. And he begins his chapter or discussion on discernment from Colossians. Colossians chapter 1, verses 9 and 10. We ask that you may be filled with the knowledge of God's will in all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so that you may lead lives worthy of the Lord. Lead lives worthy of the Lord. I'm not sure what that exactly means. However, he does go on to talk about discernment is both a personal thing that happens in solitude, and it is a communal event that happens within a group of people within the community. And I think that's a really important, both a distinction and a way of talking about discernment, because discernment requires listening from both the individual and listening within the community, through community listening, through community conversation, as well as personal reflection, listening to God within ourselves so we can reduce that chatter in our mind to hear the divine more clearly. Nouwen begins his study on this by defining what he says discernment is. He says, discernment is a spiritual understanding and an experiential knowledge of how God is active in daily life that is acquired through disciplined spiritual practice. And I have found that's true in my life. The more I develop spiritual discipline, spiritual practice, the more I feel like I can discern more clearly what God is doing. And to say, what does that even mean, discern more clearly? It's both an intuitive thing as well as a conversational element among those around me, among my community. Because as Nouwen points out, and I said earlier, that discernment is both personal and it is communal. We need both of that, all of that, to discern God's will, God's vision, God's guidance in our lives. For me, one of my main spiritual disciplines is a way of reading scripture called Lectio Divina, as I mentioned earlier. Lectio Divina came about from the 3rd century by a theologian by the name of Origen, and he saw scripture as a sacrament, and he wanted us to find, or people to find ways to read scripture that kind of enlivened it, gave it bones, gave it flesh, gave it a sense of purpose and meaning in our lives. And I have found that the Lectio Divina process, which I'll talk about in a minute, really helps me do that. And it takes me away from a simplistic reading of scripture and really presses it down within me to make sense of what my spirituality is like and how I move through the world as God's child, informed by scripture. The first part of Lectio Divina is Lectio, reading. This is, you take the scripture passage, you get real quiet within, and you read the passage meditatively, slowly. But as you're reading it, you think about, what does this passage mean? What is the surface level? What is this basically trying to communicate? So this is the most literal, most basic reading of the biblical passage, just to get an essential understanding of what it's trying to say. The second part of Lectio Divina is called meditatio, meditation. What is this passage saying to me in my life today, right now? How is it illuminating my experience? Is it supporting me in my journey or something that's going on in my life? Is it challenging me to clean up some area of my life that's not working, that's hurting others, that's outside of what God's will for my life? So again, meditation. What does this passage say to me at this moment right now? The third part of Lectio Divina is Oratio, or prayer. What do I want to say to God in response to what I've just heard, felt, experienced reading scripture in the first two ways? In the surface reading, also how the passage is illuminating my life, challenging me, supporting me, helping me grow, whatever. How do I respond to God in prayer? What do I need to say to God in prayer to what I experienced from the first two readings? And number 4, contemplation. This is where I ask, how is this passage changing me? What do I do in response to what I've seen, heard, felt through the first 3 experiences of prayer? What do I need to change, or what do I need to do more of, or how does this impact my life in a real concrete way? And this often requires deep listening to the passage, listening to my life, listening to the God that is within me, trying to speak through me and to me. So going through the first 3 stages of Lectio Divina, this 4th one is, what do I do? How is this affecting me? Does this impact my life in any concrete way? And if so, how so? And some Lectio Divina practitioners add a 5th, who I think has to do with action. So I've figured out how this passage is changing me. It's calling me to do something. Now let's say, go do it. The action itself is part of the process. Even if you don't have scripture in front of you, but you have this knowledge, this experience you've had through this engagement with scripture. So to go and do something about what you've seen, heard, felt, and experienced. So in terms of spiritual disciplines, that's what my main one is. And that's how I discern God's vision, God's guidance for my life, to hear what Holy Scripture is saying to me, how it's changing me, and how I respond to that message about my life, and how Scripture is informing my lived experience. And so I encourage you to find a way to your own spiritual discipline. Maybe I'll share some other disciplines you can engage in through this series, and find your own that works for you. So for tomorrow, I might go through a whole Lectio Divina process with you, so you get a better sense of how it impacts me in my prayer life, and how you can engage with it as well.